Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this session. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Tom Fletcher, and I'm the new principal here at Hartford, and very much looking forward to answering your questions this evening. Just one brief housekeeping point just before we get started. Would you mind just checking that you are muted? There will be chances later to ask questions, but just so we can control the audio a little bit. I don't want to delay you any further. We are so fortunate tonight to have Fiona Bruce with us. Now, Fiona is probably best known as the lead singer in a band when she was at Hartford called Don't Chew Blue Tack. And we had invited her to come along tonight and recreate some of Don't Chew Blue Tack's finest moments. Sadly, Fiona has subsequently gone on to do a bunch of other things. Like presenting Antiques Roadshow, like presenting Question Time brilliantly at the moment. And so she hasn't had a chance to prepare those songs for us tonight, but she has come along with lots of questions and a willingness to share your questions as well. So we're hugely grateful to you, Fiona, for joining us. You are a national treasure, but more importantly, you are a Hartford treasure. So I'm going to hand over to Fiona now to kick off this session. We've got just over an hour together, and I'm looking forward to it hugely.
Oh my God, what an introduction. What a horror show. I can tell you, if I had started singing, well, you'd all do something else. I tell you, you'd all be going off and, I don't know, listening to Boris Johnson, who's about to do an update for us, I think, at 5 o'clock. So anyway, so I'm sparing you all that, but it's very, very nice to be here. Very nice to talk to you, Tom, and all of you former Hartford alumni. Feels like a long time ago for me now. So I've got questions from some of you, which you can ask in person, other questions which have been submitted in writing, and I can put those on your behalf. I thought, Tom, maybe the best thing to do to begin with would be just to ask you a little bit about yourself. Obviously, you were at Hartford. We can talk about your time at Hartford and your great achievements there. But your CV is long and varied. I mean, pick out some of the highlights for us. Obviously, you were the youngest ever ambassador as a kickoff, and that was when you were in Lebanon, I think. And you then, there's some very interesting things that you actually did in Lebanon while you were there. I'm thinking in particular of your work to try and highlight the plight of domestic workers.
Thanks, Fiona. So I'm now a recovering ambassador. I had 4 or 5 years in Lebanon, actually, while the Arab Spring was starting around us. I lived literally on the road to Damascus, and the Syria war was happening 1 hour up the road, and really my job was to try and help to hold together Lebanon during that crisis. But it was also an extraordinary time because social media was opening up the Middle East, and suddenly we realized that we had this superpower, and we were able to connect with people and reach out in ways that previous diplomats had never managed. And so that became a big feature of the way that I was trying to connect with the Lebanese people. And that did lead to some strange moments. So when the Iranian embassy was blown up, I wasn't allowed to go down and actually present condolences. In those days, we had no relationship with Iran. So instead, I went down and donated blood outside the embassy, and then made sure the photo then went viral in Iran. And as you mentioned, the campaign around mistreatment of domestic workers. If an ambassador stands up and gives a speech on something, you can probably reach 3 people. If they write an article, maybe 5, but people don't really listen. And so we realized we had to try something else. And so I became a domestic worker and went in, had a great day, basically job swapping with Kalkidan Nagusi, an Ethiopian housemaid. More importantly, though, she then came and took over my job as the ambassador for a day. And there was this powerful moment where she went out after a meeting we had with the interior minister and went out in front of Lebanon's TV stations and basically said, you have to start treating us with dignity. And it led the news that night. And up and down the country, people had conversations at the dinner table that evening that they still tell me changed the way they then treated the people who worked with them in the house. So it was a real moment of change in the region, but there was opportunity to try and promote more positive change as well.
You also then went on to work for 3 different prime ministers, partly a reflection of how quickly they changed, actually, as much as your duration. But I'm thinking about Blair, Brown, and Cameron. And just tell us just a little bit about what your involvement was there.
So I was what they call the private secretary for foreign affairs, which means that I was with those characters for all of their foreign policy encounters. I was basically the person with them when they met Obama or Merkel, or when they visited China or India. I was with them for every time they phoned a leader, I would be sat next to them, briefing them. Every time they met a leader at number 10, I'd be just inside the door as the leader arrived, telling them what they should say. In fact, once when Carla Bruni and Nicolas Sarkozy arrived at number 10, David Cameron asked me, in a panic, how many times do I kiss Carla Bruni? What's the deal here? Is it 1 or 2 or 3? And I made the mistake of saying as many as you can get away with. Which then, as he opened the door to Carla Bruni, he was in hysterics, and Sarkozy, the whole meeting giving me the evil eye. The job, actually, private secretary for foreign affairs to the Prime Minister, is one of those strange civil service descriptions that no one really understands. And when we were in China on one trip, I couldn't understand why the Chinese delegation were basically looking at my nameplate and laughing. And it turned out that my title had been mistranslated as the intimate typist for the Prime Minister's affairs overseas. So all of these Chinese diplomats basically thought that my job was to set up the PM's affairs and do all his intimate typing for him as they traveled around. In reality, there wasn't much of that. It was policy advisor, speechwriter, occasional therapist, and often just a punch bag. And
negotiator, of course. And I know you were asked about that. You did how many interviews for the job, for the job of principal?
I have to say, it's harder to become principal of Hartford than it is to become UN Secretary General. You go through a lot of grueling interviews. And anyone who's been on the Hartford bike ride knows it's days and days of very exhausting challenges. It's nothing compared to the interview process, I have to say. And in one of the interviews towards the end of the day, as I was starting to flag, one of my now colleagues from governing body said, "Do you have any experience of negotiation?" And I said, "Well, I have been a diplomat for 25 years. I have negotiated with Hezbollah and with the IRA and so on." And there was just silence around the room. And someone else from governing body said, "I think you'll find this is a much tougher job." And they're probably right, because, look at the context we're in now, and negotiating with over 40 very independent fellows is in many ways harder than negotiating with all those other characters.
Now, what sets you apart? A number of things, but also I think you are the first principal to come back to Hartford, or to be a principal at Hartford, having been a student at Hartford. And you did all the jobs pretty much that were on offer while you were at Hartford.
I think I'm the first to come back. And there are advantages and disadvantages to that. I mean, it does give me a real passion for this place. And it does mean that, it's in my DNA, really. Lots of us who went to Hartford, I'm struck, we did the online Gordy the other day, and people said, "Hartford made me." Lots of us feel like that. We have that connection with Hartford. But yeah, it also meant that I worked in the lodge. I helped Kenny out when he was the steward, the butler here. I worked as a scout. I worked on the summer schools. I worked in the JCR bar, down the bar, and I worked as JCR president. So I have seen the college from many different angles. And I hope that gives me a real affection for it, and hopefully an understanding of how this strange community, this ecosystem, really fits together.
Well, should we take our first question from the people who very kindly joined us as part of this online? So thank you very much for that. Carol, I can see you there smiling away. Lovely to see you. Would you like to put your questions, Tom? Oh, you need to unmute yourself. Hang on.
Lovely. Good evening, Fiona. Good evening, Tom. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Excellent. Tom, in your introductory comments, you spoke very eloquently about building bridges with our increasingly diverse society. I wondered if you could tell us a bit more about that. What can we all do to help you build upon that key strategy?
Thank you very much, Carol. And so this is part of the reason why I was so keen to do this job. My experience in diplomacy really showed me that the big dividing line in the 21st century is actually not between East and West, or North and South, or rich and poor, Christianity and Islam. All these different dividing lines that we're told really matter now. The big dividing line, actually, in our politics and in our wider society now, is between people who believe in coexistence, in living together, and people who believe in building a bigger wall, who think that the answer to the 21st century is just to build a big wall. And that obviously includes the wall builder in chief, the current US president, hopefully for not much longer. But it's exactly the same rhetoric that I heard used, and I spend too much time online observing the ways that the kids in the Middle East are radicalized. And it's exactly the same language about, we will make you great again. We'll take you back to a time when you didn't have to live with these other people who looked a bit differently, thought a bit differently. And when you then cast that and think about, you know, the movements of people that we'll find in the next 20, 30 years as a result of the extreme climate crisis, we're going to have to learn these new ways of living together. And so I think that's the big dividing line. And I think that universities are really the front line for that argument. And particularly colleges like Hartford, who have the values that we share. So I think a college can be an amazing hub to bring together those conversations. It can be a place where you debate ideas. You know, one of the things that both Donald Trump and organizations like Islamic State hate is that curiosity, that idea that Islamic State call it the gray zone, a place where you can have an interchange of ideas, where it's okay not to have all the answers, where it's okay not just to shout at each other and just bombard people with your point of view on social media. That's what they call the gray zone. I think we should be defending that gray zone, you know, because we need somewhere where reason and critical thinking can fight back. So that's my vision really of what Hartford can add to that conversation. And I think that we can all in that context be diplomats. You know, diplomats are people who bring those conversations together. We talk a lot now about 21st century skills, emotional intelligence, empathy, creativity, curiosity. You know, those are really diplomatic skills. And I believe they're the sorts of skills that Hartford alumni have. You know, there's something in the bricks and mortar of this place that gives us those skills. And so I think we can be citizen diplomats, and I think that Hartford can play that role in bringing people together and then be, you know, a front line for a better society.
And Tom, you talked about Hartford values there. How would you describe Hartford values? What do you think they are?
I think, I mean, it's a moving target, isn't it? It's once you start trying to write down values, it's always quite tricky. But I find, you know, this has always been an incredibly open, friendly, tolerant place. I think because of the mixture of backgrounds we have here, it's probably a bit less snooty than some parts of the university or academia more widely. And I do think that we've always been good at having these difficult conversations. You know, I'm struck that if you sit around a Hartford table, you know you're going to get good debate. You know you're going to get disagreements, but there'll be reasoned disagreements. And I think really importantly, we've always been this pioneer for opportunity and social mobility. And that is such a core part now of what makes Hartford so special, that I think really that the challenge now is for us to work out what's our next big leap forward in terms of access and opportunity. If we're really to show everyone how strongly we believe in those values, then we have to identify that next jump forward for the college.
Well, if we're talking about a next jump, let's take a question from Hormuz. I can see you there. Do you want to put your question to Tom?
Thanks, and good afternoon from Toronto, Canada. And so I work at the intersection of sort of higher education and business, trying to get Canadian universities and Canadian businesses to work better together. And so as a result, I speak a lot about sort of disruptions to education during COVID. My question is, what of these disruptions do you see as having as being a good thing and lasting, and what are the ones that you see is not actually? Because there's certain things that you know student experience you can't get better than being in person. But what are some of the things that are positives out of this experience?
Thanks, Thomas. That's a great question. I mean, look, clearly the students arriving in 3 or 4 days' time, and in fact, we have 50 or 60 already here quarantining because they've come from international locations, are not going to have the same experience that alumni have had. And I think that's a huge shame. But our job is to try and find a way to protect the health of our whole community, the students, the staff, the faculty, also protect the health of Oxford and society more widely outside, you know, and act responsibly towards them, to protect that space where ingenuity can flourish. And of course, we have professors here who are working on the vaccine and working on testing. So we're actually on the front line of the response to the pandemic. We're not just responding to the pandemic passively, we're out there fighting it. So we've got to do all that, but we've also got to protect the learning environment as well. We can't just set ourselves up as effectively a hospital with everything sanitized and everyone separated. So it's a really difficult balance to strike, and do all that while also protecting Hartford's values. It's a really tough challenge. And, the last 4 weeks have shown me, we can't underestimate it. And it's a real moving target. Every day we find the government guidelines, they may be changing now as the Prime Minister is speaking. University guidelines inevitably shift as well. But we're doing our best. And I've been so impressed. And I'd love you when you can to come and see the sorts of things that have been done in Hartford in the last month. The Wi-Fi is white hot. It's ripping along, which you need when you're teaching and socializing so much online. We have a huge marquee up in OB Quad that can take over 100 people socially distanced, which will become the center, really, the fulcrum for the social life of the college. The catering staff have been incredibly creative about how you actually retain some of that student experience, the rites of passage and the rituals which are so important to Hartford life. And then we're trying to find ways to recreate the moments of spontaneity and serendipity as well, using technology often, so that you retain as much as possible of that while still protecting people. But it's very tough. And I don't want to sit here and tell students that life is normal, because it won't be normal. I think as society, we have to be a bit more understanding of what students are going through at the moment. When you look at the way the national media talks about COVID and universities coming back, it's as though every student is nothing more than a potential super spreader. When actually, imagine putting any 300 of us into a small community like this. We need to be a lot more understanding of what students are going through and what they're sacrificing. Now, the positives, there are some. Events like this, we're learning new ways of doing them. Could we have got as much of Fiona's time to come to Hartford tonight with the travel? But we've got Fiona for an hour and a half. Because of the constraints of the pandemic, there are events and outreach we can do that we couldn't do before. It's really challenging us to think creatively about how to use the technology to teach more effectively. And I have to say that the tutors here have been extraordinary in adapting their content, and that won't go back. There's not a moment when we just reset and say, let's just go back to the old model. But they found ways to preserve what is special about the Oxford tutorial system, and that individual contact with the tutor, while adapting to the constraints, which has been brilliant. And I think a final point is that this pandemic has reminded universities that we have to work much harder to explain our role in society, to really make our case for why we matter to society. And that's a wake-up call for us. Higher education did need to change. It was really, you'll know from Toronto, it was really under attack already because of these changes in society. And this could be a wake-up call.
And I'm just thinking, and instantly getting out of my time. It's very nice of you to be so kind about it. I'm not sure if that is that much of a bonus, but given what we have seen about the students coming back, and also been all over the news, my own bulletins and what have you, have universities, is Hartford as guilty of this as anybody, kind of practice a bit of a con on students, in as much as encouraging them to come back, saying, pay your fees, come back, it's going to be great, we're going to give you great education. And then lots of students are actually saying, if I'd known it was going to be like this, I'd never have come. Why didn't you tell me beforehand?
I think it's a very fair question. I'm obviously now trying to think of a diplomatic way to get it back to the more lighthearted stuff. But to be honest, yes, I think that much of the government guidance and much guidance coming from universities has not actually been honest and realistic enough about the student experience that people will have. We've tried very hard, and I've spent the last 2 days talking to returning students, quarantining students, returning graduates, and freshers. And the message has been, look, we want to be honest and realistic about the student experience that you'll have. I think there's been a tendency, because people are so keen to make this work, and I can understand that we risk sometimes saying to students, it's a bit like the Lego movie, everything is awesome, everything is perfect, you're going to get exactly the experience you had before. And we've got to be very careful that we're not deceiving people. We've got to manage people's expectations, that we will deliver extraordinary teaching and learning and research within the constraints of this pandemic. But we have to do that with all this scaffolding in place to protect us from the pandemic. And with hindsight, I would like to have seen more of that messaging from the government and from university and from the higher education sector more widely.
So do you think people have been deceived?
I think when the message goes out that everything is normal and just turn up and it will be exactly as it was in other years, then that is a deception. I think we've been very careful not to say that and to say that we're adapting, but also not to treat people, to treat people like adults and say, you all know the government guidelines. And this only works if we actually work together as a community. We don't want this to feel like a set of top-down instructions, that we will enforce vigorously. And some of what we're seeing around the country seems to fall into that category.
Let's take a question from Richard Fiddler. And Richard, I can't see you, but I think you might be there.
Yes, I'm there. There you go. Sorry, I've started my video.
Are you in the car, Richard?
I am in the car, actually. I am allowed to travel around between meetings as well. It's funny times. My days are very disruptive. I haven't done a normal day's work as I used to do for many months, but still very busy doing many things. Very good to meet you, Tom, and thank you to both of you for this wonderful introduction. But what do you see, Tom, as the biggest opportunity and the biggest challenge you would like to address as our new principal?
Wow, big question. Thank you, Richard. I think the big opportunity is to take this next leap forward in terms of access and opportunity. But the way that Hartford has always done that is not just to widen access, but to do it while also widening achievement as well, increasing achievement as well. The two things are very compatible. I went back and looked at the context for the Neil Tanner reforms. Many of you know all about the Neil Tanner process. Some of us were at Hartford because of the Tanner reforms, which really...
For those who don't know about the Tanner reforms, you might just want to enlighten some of us.
So these were the reforms back in the 70s and 80s that widened state school access to Hartford. And this year, our freshers will be 81% state school, which I think is our highest ever. So we've always been pioneering in that respect, opening up Hartford in that way. When you go back and look at the way those decisions were taken, they knew at the time that this was a risk. They knew that they would have to do things that went against university conventions in order to reach more people. But they were also determined that that shouldn't be at the expense of academic attainment. They didn't just want state school kids. They wanted the smartest state school kids in the country. And I think now the challenge for us is to really focus on widening our access, our opportunity, the diversity of the student body and the fellowship here, but doing that alongside looking for the smartest people in our society. And I think if we manage that, that will be a great sign of our values going forward. It's a sign that we won't rest on our laurels and say, well, we've done this extraordinary stuff back in the 70s and 80s, and therefore, we'll always be a pioneer. We have to keep pioneering. And one of my requests to people is to let me have your ideas for how we can do that more effectively. Where do I need to go to find that talent and to expand that opportunity? And I will get COVID permitting, I will get out there and do that. So I think that's the big challenge and actually the big opportunity, Richard, if I can use it for both.
Okay. Richard, does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you so much.
And Tom, are you setting yourself a target in terms of, because 81% by Oxford College standards is high. Are you setting yourself any kind of target in your tenure for increasing applications from or successful applications from the state sector?
So I don't think specific targets always help us in this respect, but I do think that we can try and ensure we are representative of society more widely. So that gives us quite a good way of assessing where we are. And across the university, there are guidelines now for how to do this, but looking at different socioeconomic groups, different racial groups, making sure that we've got the right balance. But I want to do that while preserving Hartford as this place of fantastic learning as well. We'll do both.
Well, I have to say, as a state school girl, it was that made me go to Hartford, because I went to a comprehensive in inner city London, and I chose Hartford solely because it was more generous in terms of taking people from the state sector. So that, you know, I owe so much to that personally. Abigail, I think you're there somewhere as well. Abigail Shepherd.
Hi.
Hi, Abigail. Right, let's hear from you. Oh, you are a recent alumnus. Very nice to see you.
The current students.
Oh, you're a current student. Oh, forgive me. Right. Oh, how very exciting. So how's it going there at the moment with the marquee and the quad and all that?
I haven't arrived yet. I'm due to move in on Sunday. I'm a third year biologist with postponed finals in 2 weeks' time. And
oh gosh, right.
For Tom was kind of looking forward, given the current climate crisis. Do you have any plans for Hartford in terms of keeping it environmentally sustainable, being at the forefront of that in Oxford? So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Go and see you on Sunday. We have the bunting hung out and we're all ready for you to come back. It's also a reminder that people are sitting exams very soon. So we'll be asking everyone in the community to you know, respect that as well. There's a moment where we'll all be excited and the noise of coming back will be increasing, but we'll try and dial it down a bit for your sake and others as well. Yes, definitely, but I need your help, basically. What I want to do is to create a team. You know, we've got some fantastic fellows who really understand climate change, Jamie Lorimer, Louise Slater and others, and who will help guide us on what we can do. We have huge appetite to do more among the fellowship and among the college staff. And I think the student body as a whole will, and I encourage you to, will push us to go further and faster on climate. So you're very much pushing an open door, and I want to try and bring all those different groups together and brainstorm on what we should be doing. Part of that will be around our investment strategy, and I've sat this week with our brilliant investment bursar, Professor Pat Roach, and he's also very keen that we look carefully at our portfolio to make sure that we're not inadvertently supporting anyone we don't want to be supporting. Part of it will be about our estate strategy, and we've got to, you know, the team working on the rollout of our graduate accommodation, the Holywell accommodation, the new library, and so on, are doing all that, really determined to stay ahead on sustainability. And part of it will just be the ideas that we generate as a community. You know, I don't want this to be a top-down, you know, we are going to be the greenest college initiative. I want this to be something we do together, but where we can be really proud of what we achieve.
And Abigail, are there things in particular that you'd like Tom to be looking at, or any particular ideas that you want promoted in terms of making Hartford more sustainable?
I think as well as the big things like investments, which obviously students don't have very much control over, so it's nice to hear that that's being discussed. Also, just the little things that we can do to help, making sure that all of the light fittings are LEDs, really simple things like that, that when we move in, we notice, and they might not necessarily be flagged up by college unless we bring them to your attention. So things like that, making sure we're recycling, not wasting food, the little things that we can do, as well as the big things like investments.
I have to kind of jump in, Fiona, just to say, one observation I have of undergraduates today compared to undergraduates back in our day is that they have much more sense of agency and passion about changing the world. You know, there's a more activist mentality, I think, than was the case in the past. And I really want to unleash that and encourage it. And so, Abigail, thank you. Please come and see me. Once you've done your finals, come and see me and we'll discuss those ideas.
And best of luck, Abigail, in your finals. Got to remember all too well that feeling. Very, very best of luck, since they've been delayed. That's just incredibly tough. And actually, if we going from Abigail, who's kind of at the end of her time at Hartford, to someone who has written in a question about being at the beginning. So this is Peter Newman, who did geography in 1971. He's very kindly told us here. He said, "For me in Michaelmas 1973, putting on a college shirt to represent Hartford was almost the first thing I did. And I felt straight away that I belonged. How will the college succeed in engendering that feeling in the new undergraduates this term?"
It's a really good question, Peter, and I'm so glad you felt that. I felt that too, and I know many people on this call will recognise that feeling of pride, and it's so good that we retain that as well. One of the things I'm really keen that we do is think of the alumni as the fourth common room, as very much part of the community. In a way, it's one of the things the pandemic allows us to do, is to actually draw the alumni more closely into the life of college. So thank you for being on the call, Peter, and thank you for reminding us of that attachment that we all feel. The truth is, it's harder. Freshers Week starts on Sunday, and we'll be doing, for example, socially distanced freshers dinners. They won't feel like they did for many people on this call, but they will be, I hope, better than nothing.
So Tom, how does that work then? Is that sitting in your room, having your meal with a big Zoom call up with other people in the gallery view?
So under the government guidelines, of course, everything we do is within the government guidelines. We have a bit more flexibility as an academic institution. But for those dinners, for example, just as with normal lunches and dinners in the hall, household bubbles. Everyone is in a household bubble, and you sit with your bubble. There's more perspex, I'm afraid, on the table than people would want to see, but it's there to protect us all. So you sit in your groups, but at least there is that moment of community, because all the Zooming and stuff is great, and it gives us something imagine if this crisis had happened 10 years ago. It'd been so much harder to navigate, but it's not enough. You need those moments, and a lot of tutors feel very strongly about this as well. If they're doing online teaching, they want to have those moments of human connection, maybe a walk in the park or around the Radcliffe camera before term starts, to just establish a rapport. And we want people to feel that Hartford is magnetic. So we'll recreate as much of that as possible. The marquee will really help us. We'll be doing, for example, aspects of chapel in the marquee. There'll be other sorts of events out there that we can recreate. And then I'm also saying to all the students, and I may come to regret this, that every time that they miss out on an experience because of the restrictions that we have to put in place to protect ourselves, they need to email me and say, you need to make this happen. We're not cancelling those experiences. We're only postponing them. And then at the moment at which we come out on the other side of this pandemic and we're able to live life normally again, I will have a stack of emails. Don't worry, Abigail, I won't print them out. I will have them on my system, and we will do our best to recreate those experiences, those moments, those rituals and rites of passage and moments of spontaneity and serendipity. It won't be in many respects, it won't be as good, but everyone here is determined to try our best on that.
Gosh, I have to say, if I was going to email you about some of my freshers experiences, well, I'm not sure or even ask you to recreate them, but there we are.
Don't worry, it's all on the file. It's all here. I promise to destroy all the files from our era, basically.
Well, mine was a bit before yours. Now, you guys haven't asked a question. John Clark, I can see you pair there, but I was seeing that you were chuckling away at something that Tom said. Is there anything you want to, since I can see you in my screen there, is there anything that either of you two would like to add into this conversation? You just need to unmute yourself.
Yes, how do I do it? Yeah. Okay. I was chuckling because discussion about the socially distanced dinners. I was wondering if there's such a thing as socially distanced sconcing and whether that's been worked out. And do you have sconcing anymore? I don't know.
I don't even know what sconcing is. So
you don't. You're so young.
No. What is it?
It's where if anybody commits an offence at dinner, like talking too much about work or talking about, in my days, talking about girls, then you could be sconced, which meant you had an alcoholic drink of your choice in a 3.5 pint container, and you drank as much as you could or wanted to, and then you passed it down to the left and it went round the table.
Oh, I remember this. Yeah,
you do.
I do remember this. Yeah, well, so that could be something, Tom, that you could maybe personally recreate when, after the pandemic.
I don't recall that being such a feature of my student time. I was, very much in the library, as any of my peers will confirm, and I've muted all of them, by the way, so that they can't comment either way on that. Yeah, and obviously, in my current role, you'd expect me to encourage everyone to behave very responsibly around alcohol, while also having excellent fun. I understand from the president of the boat club, Professor Roach, that sconcing is still very much part of many dinners around Hartford, and I'm sure people will find ways to recreate those moments of fun and spontaneity. I think part of my interview process for becoming JCR president included something a little bit like that, that I was required to do. Thankfully, it didn't feature in the process to become principal. Maybe I'll find that there's someone waiting outside the door now. The senior fellow is out there now with the principal sconce, but I think I've escaped that for now. But John, next time you're back, we look forward to your demonstration.
Excellent. We'll all look forward to that, John. That sounds absolutely marvellous. Now, on a slightly more serious note, actually, we've got a question from Barry O'Reilly. Barry, are you there?
Yes, I am. Tom, congratulations on your role. I mean, it's really wonderful to see you there. And I listened to your welcome video that you sent out. And one of the ideas that I kind of really liked in that was about this idea of restoring a fragile society. I think we're well aware of kind of how fragile life has become, not just through the pandemic, but I think also along political lines, you know, the level of debate, the level of, you know, the intellectual level of society has kind of really gone down, and it tends to be kind of a slagging match and you know, mudslinging all the time and so forth. Maybe it was like that 20 years ago, but it feels like worse than it used to be, right? So I think this idea of kind of the intellectual tone of conversation, I think, you know, the importance of the universities, you brought it out there kind of at the start of the hour as well. You know, what role does the university have? What role does the college have? What role do these intellectual beacons have in society? And, you know, apart from all of your other responsibilities and so forth, I mean, you know, what will be your public statement of these things, and what kind of initiatives are you likely to take? I mean, your predecessor was quite a public figure. There were a lot of, you know, Sunday magazine articles, some newspaper articles by himself and so forth. I'd be interested to know kind of what you'd like to do to contribute to public debate and towards restoring, you know, our fragile society and putting a bit more intellectual rigor and a bit more kindness, or I suppose, around the way in which we all treat each other as a society.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Barry, and thank you too for mentioning Will, because it gives me a chance just to pay huge tribute to him. If I can summon up a tenth of the gusto and energy and resilience of Will, then I'll be delighted. I think it's also, in a way, it gives me a chance to answer, perhaps more honestly, Richard's question about the challenge, because I do think this challenge is this fragility in our society. I think it's caused by three major trends, actually, that we don't always understand. One is this plummeting in trust in institutions, trust in anything that looks like authority or hierarchy. And that's not just in governments or in, you know, foreign policy as a result of Iraq, or in the media as a result of the media scandals and so on. If you look at the polls on public trust, actually we're losing trust in doctors and teachers, you know, and all of us know that every time we get a prescription from the doctor, the first thing we do is to go onto Google and check it with Dr. Google too. You know, my 8-year-old son, you know, we have a parental WhatsApp group, and there's a constant conversation going on about the quality of teaching, and are they learning enough maths, and are they doing so trust is this massive trend that I think is at the root of many of the issues that you mentioned. But then the second big one is economic, and it's this perception of inequality. I was in the room with Gordon Brown and Barack Obama and the others at the G20 in 2009. And Barack Obama said that, you know, unless we fix our international system, then the next economic crash is going to be absolutely devastating. And of course, everything we've seen since then, since that 2008 crash, has been a reversal of that. You know, the international institutions have been orphaned by Donald Trump. We've seen this polarization and extremism in political dialogue. So that perception of inequality has continued to grow, you know, and there's no reason why we should assume that the implications of the 2008 crash will be any less devastating than the implications of the 1929 crash, which anyone who studied history at Hartford will understand very well, and I'm sure many others. And the third big trend, I think, Barry, is actually a more existential trend around technology, and we all know that the speed and pace of that change, and we'll go through as much change in society. I wrote about this in a book I wrote called The Naked Diplomat. As much change, technological change, in the next 100 years as in the last 43 centuries, which is like going from cave paintings to driverless cars in the lifetime of the students who are arriving here in the next few days. And that, of course, creates fragility and uncertainty. You know, whole models of power and society will shift. So that's the challenge we're up against. But I believe the answer to all those challenges around trust, around inequality, and around what do we do about technology. And by the way, we have fantastic professors here working on AI and tech and ethics. And Carissa Believe launched her book last week, our newest fellow, on privacy. The answer to all of those challenges, I think, is education. And the road to that answer on all those challenges lies through through Hartford. I think we need education that isn't just about knowledge, but is also about the skills and values you need to take out into the 21st century. I'm trying to write a book on this at the moment called 21st Century Streetcraft, which is promoting education, not just of the head, but also of the hand and the heart. And ultimately, and we spent 2 years researching the future of learning. What do we really need the next generation to learn so that the robots work for them and they don't work for the robots? And the answer, coming back to your question, was very, very simple. It's how can we be brave, how can we be curious, and how can we be kind? And ultimately for me, if at the end of my time here, we have a generation of students who are kinder, more curious and braver than us, then that will be a measure of success.
And when you say education of the heart, the hand and the head, what does that mean, Tom?
So I think the hand is about skills. So it's actually really understanding how to cope with the global world. It's understanding how to manage our relationship with technology. It's about some very practical life skills as well. You know, I think many people leave university knowing a huge amount about 11th century Croydon, but not necessarily how to manage their finances, how to manage their mental health, how to manage their physical health. You know, look at the books in any airport departure, W.H. Smith. And that's the subject. Everyone wants to know how to lose weight, how to manage their money, how to manage their mental health. So there's a big gap in our knowledge there. So we want to do more to teach those skills, I think. And I had the course I taught at New York University was designed by students to fill those gaps. I basically got them to hack the curriculum and say, what's missing from your education? And this is all based on what they told me was missing. And then basically it's those values around how can we be more curious? How can we learn to be kinder? How can we learn courage? And this is not courage in the old idea of courage, of just sort of charging in and being reckless. It's actually the courage to come back to the earlier questions, to find new ways to live together.
We've got a question from Jeffrey Preston. Jeffrey, if you're there. Let's see.
Yes, I'm here.
Ah, hi, Jeffrey.
Hi. I'd like to change tack a little bit. It might be early days to answer this question, but I'm going to do so anyway. I don't know whether Tom's got any great plans for building projects, let us say in his first 5 years. He's mentioned the library already, but there may well be others that we'd be interested to hear about.
Thanks, Jeffrey. And yes, is the answer. Fortunately for me, I mean, one of the great things about having Will as a predecessor and having such an active and brilliant group of fellows running the college is that many of these plans are already in place. So I've inherited our most ambitious capital expenditure plan in our history. My only job is then to try and raise the money to pay for it. They've left me that end of the equation. So in the next 5 to 10 years, we're already renovating Holywell Quad. Anyone who had rooms in Holywell Quad will be welcoming this fact. I quarantined for 2 weeks in August in Holywell Quad and got to experience these new refurbished rooms, and they are fantastic. We're of course also adapting our student accommodation to put more kitchens and bathrooms in to allow people to live in these household bubbles within the constraints of the pandemic. So there's that constant overhaul really of the student accommodation. We're a bit worried about where we are in the student barometer, the league table on student experience. We want to move up that table. We want more people to look at our accommodation and say that's another reason alongside Fiona's reason to come to Hartford. So that's a big deal for us. We've got big projects in North Oxford around Winchester Road. We own a number of properties there. And the idea is to combine the properties on that land and set up a new graduate centre. We sometimes worry that our graduates are a bit dispersed around town, and we want to find a way to bring them together more effectively. So that's a huge project for us. And then, I've mentioned the library, as you say. I'll be moving out of my lodgings. I will leave the mouse there. Hopefully he'll move out soon as well. But the college will then take over that space and expand. Anyone who knows OB Quad will expand the library around into where the lodgings currently are. So there'll be much more study space for students, and it will be there'll be more light. It'll be a nicer working environment for them too. So those are the big ones. And obviously it won't surprise any of you to hear me say this, but all help gratefully received. We have, I think, almost now 10,000 alumni. And between you, you've been incredibly generous over the years, and we're incredibly grateful for that. Some of you are receiving, I know, calls from our telethon students at the moment, so thank you for taking those calls. But of course, like everyone here, we are facing a tougher financial context, and so if you are feeling that there are things you'd like to support, please do get in touch.
Okie dokie. We've got, in terms, it's not quite building exactly, but we've got a question from Charlie Addison Adams, so Geography 2017. Says, the quad an important part of college life. It seems creative and necessary use has been made of it with the marquee going up, which you referred to earlier on, Tom. I wonder whether when the quad returns to normal, I mean, that's assuming it does, and you don't keep that marquee, could it be somewhat rewilded with a wildflower meadow, encouraging greater biodiversity in the traditional mown lawn? Surely this would reflect Hartford as a college forward-thinking, welcoming of diversity. I mean, we haven't got a lot of green space in Hartford, has to be said. I mean, I think that's probably one of the things, is reason why Hartford is where it is on the old barometer. But anyway, this is just a question that's coming from Charlie.
Good question, Charlie. I think, can I take that to our new climate green group, which Abigail will be navigating for us, leading for us, I expect. I don't know.
That's called dodging the question, Tom.
Complete dodge, I know. I think a lot of people are quite attached to the quad as it is. Doesn't mean it has to stay like that. As Fiona says, we are quite short of green space, and it struck me, when I sit there with the other heads of house comparing notes on how we're responding to the pandemic. I was at New College last night and saw what they're doing. I'm speaking to the head of house at Magdalen. They've got a lot more outdoor space to use, which is particularly useful at the moment because we're moving so much outdoors. We know that the virus struggles more in the open air, and so much more of what we do will be in the open air. So they do have more options than we do at the moment. I think, Charlie, let's get through this term with our famous marquee, which is the answer to almost all our problems. Beautifully lit, beautifully heated. I sound like Donald Trump now. It's the best marquee in Oxford. It really is fantastic. And then, let's have a conversation about what we do with that space afterwards. I'm quite looking forward to seeing the lawn again on it, the grass again.
I used to like lounging around on the grass, I must admit, but there we are. This is just picking up on the point that Barry, that you were making earlier on, and this is a question from Alice Whitehead. What do you think is the role of universities in upholding truthful debate and holding institutions to account for their actions at a time when truth is more fragmented than ever? And this is her view, obviously, and government appears maverick rather than serious.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really important question. I do think part of our job is to speak truth to power. I do think part of our job is to be a place of reason in a time of echo chambers, frankly. And as we discussed earlier on, actually, I think the first question, in a time when people's default position seems to take an extreme position and then just shout from the rooftops at everyone else. I think it's creating the space for that debate. I don't think we necessarily want to prescribe where that debate takes us. There isn't a single Hartford political view on anything. I think the Hartford community has a whole myriad of views, and part of our job is to create that space where you can have those debates. But I will certainly, Will was a very powerful example of that. I will look to pick the battles out there where I think Hartford needs to be in the argument. For me, they'll often be around diplomacy. I'm in a few of the arguments at the moment about what happens in America, which is so important because of the implications of what that means for the international system and for us. I think we should be in the arguments around the future of learning and the arguments about how we build a better society as we come out the other side of this pandemic. So we will pick our arguments and we'll be in them.
And as you say, in terms of picking arguments, I mean, Will was, and Barry mentioned this too, Will was a very public figure. Is that something that you see as your role too, in terms of putting Hartford out there in the debate and making people more aware of Hartford and getting your views across?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a tremendous bonus that we had in Will someone who had such stature and authority on issues around the political economy. And Will was obviously also absolutely passionate and powerful campaigner on against Brexit, which was is a big issue for many people in the community. So I think it is good to be out there, to have some visibility. I think we'll probably find that because Will and I have different experiences, we'll be out there arguing on different things. I also have to, coming from the diplomatic background, when you're an ambassador, you don't get to have an independent voice. You effectively can only articulate what is the view of the government of the day. So it's quite refreshing for me to be in a situation where I can get into some arguments as myself, and into some arguments as a spokesperson on behalf of Hartford and the university. The trick actually in a social media age is to try and explain the difference between the two. And I'll be quite cautious, particularly early on, in making sure that we're positioning Hartford in the right arguments.
And if you were to look, I mean, you're just at the start of your tenure, obviously, Tom, but if you were to look back on your tenure and think, yes, that I've achieved what I wanted to achieve, what would you say those key things would be?
I think most importantly, it's that generation of graduates from here who are going out and actually making an impact in society. And by that, I don't mean making loads of money or being conventionally successful in the way that often universities and particularly Oxford colleges talk about their alumni. I think our alumni are out there making huge impact in all sorts of different ways. And I would love to look at new measures, of how we assess that, rather than just focusing on people's positions or wealth. So that impact on society is a really important one. I think I really want to liberate our fellows, our tutors, our professors to do extraordinary research. I think often what you find in higher education is that our best and brightest, our most ingenious brains are surrounded by so much admin and bureaucracy that it chokes off their freedom. And so I want to liberate our fellows to be doing that extraordinary research. I don't know what they will go out there and invent. I want to see Nobel Prizes being celebrated in OB Quad. And I have no doubt that we will be celebrating Nobel Prizes in OB Quad. Most of us will probably not understand the first thing about what they've invented or the leaps forward that they've been behind. But we have such brilliant professors here. I really want to see them take that expertise out there and make it where we can more accessible. It was great last week with Carissa Belith. She's explaining these very complicated issues around privacy and artificial intelligence, but in a very accessible way to the public, to help them understand how to protect their data. I'd like to see more of that, showing society how we can actually be helpful and useful as part of that debate. And then I think there are the more structural questions where I'd want to see our estate in world-class facilities, basically, so that we're as attractive as we can be to that more diverse range of students. What I keep being told is that with an Oxford college, it has to be about evolution rather than revolution. Change is quite difficult, and it's harder than in many jobs to bring everyone with you in the way you need to. But those would be the sorts of things that I think we should assess ourselves against.
And in terms of your sort of availability to graduates, I mean, the fact that you're making yourself available here in this setting is certainly something new to me. And I remember when I was there a million years ago, and Geoffrey Warnock was the head of the college, and the only time I ever met him was when I was playing David Bowie so loudly in my room above his, where you now live, that he actually came up in his dressing gown and knocked on the door and told us off. And that was literally the only time I ever met him. And I certainly didn't want to meet him again after that. I was so terrified. But how available, accessible will you be? How important do you think that is, or perhaps not?
It's very, very important to me. It was also my approach to being ambassador. And in those days, there were very, very few of us out there on social media, and I was trying very hard to break down the barriers and to explain what we did, without surrounding it with these ridiculous kind of words about diplomatic relations and so on. So I want to be really available. By the way, Fiona, you'll be pleased to know that David Bowie is now behind me. So in a sign of the generational shift, he's moved from your stereo into the principal's study here. And it says on it, which may be the motto for the next 10 years, I don't know where we're going, but I promise you it won't be boring. So maybe if I were to tweet one thing about the next 10 years, that's my aspiration. So I do want to be much more accessible. I hope that once we're open up again, people won't hesitate to come and knock on my door here. In the meantime, if you're passing by in Oxford, knock on the window and at least give me a kind of socially distanced wave. And I think the technology does allow us to do more of this. So we're creating these new alumni groups, these different networks. I want more of the alumni involved in helping our students, frankly, mentoring them, teaching them, helping them develop, being a network for them when they go out into the world, which is a pretty uncertain world for them. So we'll be doing lots more of this sort of thing. I have to say, by the way, though, that my first dinner at Hartford, no one put this in the small print when I applied for the job. My first dinner at Hartford, I was looking forward to putting on the gown and saying the grace and sitting there at high table. I was there on my own in the hall because of the pandemic for an online Gordy, which, I'm sorry, John and others, is not the wild night that you remember. There was probably not much sconcing at the online Gordy, not that I could see anyway. In fact, the only alcohol on my table was the hand sanitizer. A good sign of where we are in 2020. So some of these things won't be as fun as a full-on Gordy, and we will do that Gordy years of 89 to 91. Don't worry, we will do that once we reopen. But we can use the technology to be accessible, and so I want to do more of this. I also need your ideas, frankly. I think often colleges treat alumni as a source of potential money. And so we decide what we want to do and then come and say, please give us 100 quid to help us achieve that. I'm even more interested, I would like the money too, please, but I'm even more interested in the ideas about the next 10 years, about the kind of place you want us to be.
I mean, certainly I have never had so many letters asking me for money from Hartford as I have in the last 5 years. So no, this is prior to you. I don't know about everybody else. I said, God, what is going on at Hartford? I get letters all the time. So it's like, could you fund this? Could you fund that? Could you fund the other? So what is given there are so many alumni listening to this, how do you see your relationship with the alumni? Are we just wallets basically, or what else can we be doing?
I think so. I spoke earlier on about the alumni being the fourth common room. I want the alumni to feel they're that close in to college life. And I think the way we do that is by actually building out these networks. The 21st century is all about networks, not hierarchies. And Hartford has this extraordinary network. There are 153, we've dropped 7, Fiona. I don't know whether that's me or not. I'm sorry about that.
Sorry.
Or earlier, maybe I gave a very long answer about the problems in society today. But I want alumni to feel part of those networks. And so we're building out networks by subject group, by different professions, by different interests. In the next 3 months, as part of our review of where Hartford goes in the next 10 years, I have 20 questions, 20 difficult questions that include, for example, what do we need to do to be the greenest college? And I want to build conversations with alumni and current students and our fellows, of course, around those different questions. And so that's what I mean really by coming to you for ideas. What I would say is, if you are getting too much, please tell us. It's difficult to get the rhythm right and not overload you with messages. We want to keep in touch, and I'll do a monthly message that says, here's what's going on in Hartford, but I'm going to try not to bombard you with, have you contributed in the last 3 days?
that would be good.
You're off the hook now, Fiona. You did this tonight, so we promise you no requests for funding until 2021.
Oh yeah, well, yeah, I'll believe that when I hear it. But anyway, listen, I mean, I think I can't pretend to speak for all the alumni, but the fact that I'm doing this and other people are on the call means that Hartford was and still is important to us. I think otherwise I don't think we'd be on this call, and meant an awful lot to us, and certainly helped me enormously in my life, and giving me confidence, and just introducing me, as a girl at state school in inner city London, to just a world that I could never have imagined. And it has made all the difference to me, I have to say. So, to be able to give back in some way is something that I very much want to do, joking apart. I absolutely do. I mean, I'm thinking,
that Hartford made us. I look back and think about how it felt to walk through the quad, walk through the lodge 25 years ago, maybe more perhaps, as part of my Freshers Week. I would never have imagined that I'd have you know, I had to basically get this job in order to get a nicer room in OB Quad. It was the only way I could get an OB Quad room. But exactly that. I mean, all the adventures since then, and hopefully the adventures we're all having at the moment and we'll have in the future, you know, it all comes back to here. And I think we all look back, and there were probably days we'd like to forget, but they blend into this extraordinary set of memories and experiences, and that's really the value of Hartford.
Well, look, I mean, I think we had some submitted questions. If I could see more of you, a kind of question time style, I would definitely try and get more questions from you. But I know there's 148 of you, 50 or whatever, but I can't see you all, so I can't really sort of do that. But I think, you know, I think this has been, you know, hugely valuable session. Actually, brilliant to hear your ideas, Tom, and your plans for the college. I think, I mean, I think we're probably kind of coming towards the end now, but I just wanted to really end by asking you, Tom, you know, for your sort of final thoughts.
Well, thank you, Fiona, for today, because you know, not least when Boris Johnson is on your TV, and for you to join us rather than listening to that. Who knows what he has announced in the last hour? I'm sure many others will tell me shortly.
It's okay, I recorded it. Don't worry.
Recorded it. So, firstly, a huge thank you to you. I do want to say once again, a huge thank you to Will Hutton for the way that he's left this college. The energy in the fellowship is extraordinary. The quality of the college officers and staff here is so good, and it means that as an incoming principal, I don't have to focus so much on the plumbing, if you like, on trying to fix those problems which many heads of house tell me they experience at Oxford College. So it does mean I have more time to spend on thinking about that longer term strategy, that longer term vision for Hartford, and try to bring together these different common rooms to think together about how we work together for that. So for me, I've come to realize in the last month that being principal of Hartford is not a position, it's actually a process. You know, it's not a destination, it's a journey. And I do want us to have real ambition for the next 10 years. But also I'm very, very conscious that none of that vision will be realizable unless we do bring our whole community more closely together. And if we do that, then coming back to some of those earlier questions, we really can make the next leap forward in terms of access, and we really can be a front line for a better society, a hub for great research and learning, for all that ingenuity I spoke about in our fellowship. We can launch into the world these students who will be more kind, more curious, and more brave than we've been. And if we do all that, then I would be up in 1 decade's time for taking a sconce from John, and I will celebrate in that way. And I look forward to seeing you all, hopefully many times before that as we emerge from the pandemic, but that will be the moment of the sconcing. Okay.
Well, Tom, thank you very much for that. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And I hope that's answered some of your questions. Anyway, I'm sure there are quite a few more, but these are the ones I've got. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. And Tom, thank you. And good luck. Enjoy it.
Thank you, Fiona. See you all soon. Thanks again.